One particular Sunday, when I was 10 years old, I walked into my Sunday school class, and the best thing that could ever happen to a 10-year-old boy happened to me. The teacher had converted the classroom into an elaborate obstacle course. Literally, the best thing that could ever happen to a 10-year-old boy. The teacher had rearranged the chairs and the whiteboards and all the other supplies, and they had made this really cool obstacle course. And as the rest of the students began to arrive and the teacher began to give us instructions for today, our teacher told us that he would be looking for volunteers. And one of us boys if we volunteered, we would be blindfolded, and we'd have to navigate through the obstacle course only listening to the teacher's instructions. And if that would have been the only instruction for the morning, that would have been challenging enough, right? You can imagine trying to navigate over, under, and above chairs, just hearing the voice of your teacher. But that's not where the instructions stopped. The teacher also told the rest of us 10-year-old boys that we had to do everything within our power to distract the student from the voice of the teacher. Again, another best thing that could have ever happened to a 10-year-old boy. So you could see all of us boys, we would yell, we would scream, we would clap our hands as loud as we could, whatever it took, so the student could not hear the voice of the teacher. But each time, no matter how obnoxious we were, the student could still hear the voice of the teacher. So we resorted to our next tactic. We would try imitating the voice of our teacher. Now, you could imagine a bunch of 10-year-old boys trying to imitate the voice of their middle-aged male teacher, right? You could, Johnny, this is your teacher. You're going to need to take 2 steps to the right. Giving him clear instructions straight into the wall. But at no point did little Johnny ever follow or fall for our little tricks. And then, when our first 2 attempts failed, I remember we resorted to good old-fashioned lying. This was literally the best Sunday school class I ever had. We would do whatever we could to make little Johnny fail. I remember little buddies, let's say little lies like, hey, do you smell that? The room's filling with smoke. Johnny, I think the room's on fire. Get out of here. Take the blindfold off. We would do whatever we could to distract Johnny from reaching the end. Now, if my memory serves me correctly, every student who volunteered, was blindfolded, and tried to navigate through the obstacle course actually made it to the end. No matter how hard all of us 10-year-old boys would try to distract them, make noise, all those things, the student was still able to hear the voice of the teacher. Now, it may have taken a little extra time because of the distractors. It may not have always been pretty. There may have been times where the student accidentally listened to the wrong voice. But in the end, the student was always able to make out the voice of the teacher. And just like this Sunday school lesson, today we're going to be looking at a passage where Jesus tells us we need to listen and follow His voice. And so we're going to jump right in this morning. We're going to be in John chapter 10. If you need a Bible, we've got volunteers who are passing those out right now. Just raise your hand and a volunteer will put that in your hands. The words will be on the screens, or feel free to use your own Bible, or if you got the Bible on your phone or whatever, feel free to get to that. Once you get to John chapter 10, if you will stand with me as we read the word, we're going to be beginning in verse 2. And if you have one of those Bibles we're passing out, that's our gift to you. You can keep that. And we're on page 583. All right, read with me. We're going to start in verse 2. But he who enters by the door is the shepherd of the sheep. To him the gatekeeper opens. The sheep hear his voice, and he calls out his sheep. He calls his own sheep by name and leads them out. When he has brought out all his own, he goes before them, and the sheep follow him, for they know his voice. A stranger they will not follow, but they will flee from him, for they do not know the voice of strangers. And jump down to verse 12. He who is a hired hand and not a shepherd, who does not own the sheep, sees the wolf coming and leaves the sheep and flees. And the wolf snatches them and scatters them. He flees because he is a hired hand and cares nothing for the sheep. I am the good shepherd. Go ahead, have a seat. By the time we leave today, I want us to be able to know two things from this passage. What is this passage telling us to do, and why is that important? Now, before going any further, I want to say this is a very rich passage. There's a lot of good lessons in here. We could probably teach on this one passage for several weeks. It is that rich. But the one thing that I want you to hear from it this morning is that we are to follow the voice of Jesus. That is the what. What are we supposed to do? We're supposed to follow the voice of Jesus. And as we start thinking about that, as we start to ask ourselves, what does it mean, or how do we follow the voice of Jesus? I want us to think of it in terms of thinking of our life in three different areas. We need to ask ourselves, what voice are we listening to that ultimately guides our voice? The second thing we need to ask ourselves is, what voice are we listening to that guides our decisions, the decisions we make every day? And then the third thing is, we need to ask ourselves, what voices are we listening to in our own thoughts? So let's jump into that first one briefly. What voice are we listening to that ultimately guides our life? We have all made something the master of our life. And what voice ultimately guides our life? Ben, when he's up here and he teaches, it wouldn't be terribly uncommon to hear him talk about the master principle. This idea that we all have several things that are important to us. We have some things that are very important to us. We may even have a few things that are extremely important to us. But at the end of the day, if we have to decide one thing, if we have to choose between several things that are extremely important to me, that one thing we choose, whatever that one thing or whoever that one thing is, that thing is your master. That voice ultimately guides you. Now, when doing a little bit of homework, a little bit of studying for this passage in John chapter 10, I was reading some of the authors throughout the ages who wrote on this passage and kind of gave their 2 cents, their commentary on the passage. And one theme that I saw emerge from a lot of the commentators was this idea of the shepherd calling out to their sheep. Now, you and I, does anybody in here actually know a shepherd? Anybody here an actual shepherd? No. Okay, that's what I figured. Okay, thank you. You've proved my hypothesis correct. Okay, but if you would have been one of Jesus' original hearers, you probably would have been very familiar with this. Back in that time and in that part of the world, shepherding and flocks was a big part of society, culture, and even the economy. And so they probably would have been familiar with this idea. And back then, and even in parts of the world today, shepherds still speak to their sheep. They still call out to their sheep. They'll sing to their sheep, or they may even, just like Jesus described, they may actually call out to their sheep by name. And the idea here being that as a sheep begin to become familiar and recognize the voice of their shepherd, they'll also begin to trust that voice. And you could tell how very practical this would be, right? You can imagine all your sheep in a sheep pen, and the shepherd wants to take them out to the pasture. You know, how draining would it be if the shepherd had to go and pull or push every single sheep throughout the gate? But they don't have to do that. All a shepherd has to do is speak to his sheep, and the sheep willingly follow him out to pasture. Just like this story, you and I, we are the sheep in this story, and we're all following something. There's one voice that is ultimately guiding us, and there's one voice that we're willing to follow. Now, before we answer too quickly to a voice of that's not our shepherd, that is not Jesus, I want us to remember our passage this morning. There are the shepherds, right? There are also the hired hands. And both of these are calling out to us, and we must ask ourselves, which voice are we going to be listening to? Here's the thing you need to know about the hirelings. The hireling voices, the hireling, when it calls out to us, the hireling does not care about us. The hireling does not care about the sheep. It does not love the sheep. A hireling is only there to use the sheep. Here's another thing. A hireling is willing to sacrifice the future for short-term benefit. Do you ever hear the voice of a hireling calling out to you? Do you ever hear the voice of a hireling calling out to you? It is willing to sacrifice the future for short-term benefit. So do not listen to the voice of your hireling when you determine what is the master, the voice that ultimately guides your life. Listen to the voice of Jesus. Now, this brings us to the second area. What voice are we listening to in the decisions that we make every day? Right? We make decisions all the time, every day. That's no surprise to anybody, right? But many of us, whatever we have made the master of our lives, is each decision that we make in line with that, right? We may say, many of us in the room today may say that we have made Jesus the master of our lives. His voice is the voice we follow above all others. But is each decision we're making in line with the voice of Jesus? Is each decision in line with that? Many people are following Jesus, but they still hold on to a hireling's voice in some area of their life, right? We may say that Jesus is the master of our lives, but many of us still hold on to a hireling's voice, a voice that does not care about us in some area of our lives, perhaps in some decisions that we make on a regular basis, or perhaps in some big decisions that we've made recently or are about to make. We can still be tempted to listen to the voice of a hireling, even though we've proclaimed that we are going to follow the voice of Jesus as the master of our lives. Now, what are some of the areas that we are especially prone to listening to the voice of a hireling instead of the voice of the Good Shepherd? What are some of those areas? Let's start with career. Are you in the career that Jesus wants you to be in? Or did you choose your career based upon the voice of another? Perhaps you listened to the voice of greed, of pride, or selfish ambition. What about the relational decisions you make every single day? Are you making relational decisions based upon the voice of Jesus? Or are you making relational decisions based upon the voices of loneliness, desperation, or instant gratification? What about the financial decisions we make every day? Financial decisions such as budgeting or generosity. Are we making those decisions based upon the voice of Jesus? Or are we making those decisions based upon another voice? Perhaps the voice of greed or fear or scarcity. There are a lot of voices calling out to us, right? Just like the story of my 10-year-old Sunday school class, right? There's a lot of voices calling out to the blindfolded student. Only one of those voices cares about the student. Only one of those voices wants the student actually to get to the end. The other students are calling out to him, and they are not worried about the long-term benefit. They're willing to sacrifice the future just for short-term gain. Now, the third area that I want us to ask, what voice are we listening to? And that is in the area of our thoughts. Now, if I may be open with you this morning, if I may be honest, if I may even be a little vulnerable with you this morning, I want to share with you that this is the area where I struggle with the most. This is a personal struggle of mine. All too often, I am willing to listen and to entertain the voice of a hireling in my own thoughts. Right? And for you, do you ever, in your mind, you ever hear a negative, a condemning voice, a voice that just has a plain old bad attitude? Do you ever dwell on that? I do. I deal with this negative self-talk. And what do we do if we deal with that? Well, a couple months ago, maybe a few months now, I saw something on social media. It was a commencement speech at the UT of Austin, and it was from an Admiral William McRaven. And he was basically sharing with the graduates about how his Navy SEAL training prepared him for challenges that we all face in the world. Anybody familiar with this, the Admiral McRaven's? Okay, cool. Okay, so by going viral, I mean my sister shared a link with me a few months ago, and it was great. It was this long thing. It was fantastic. And again, it was about how the Navy SEAL training prepared him for life. And I just want to share one small part with you because I believe it's applicable today as we ask ourselves, how do we deal with listening to a hireling's voice when it comes to our thoughts? Let me read it to you. During the land warfare phase of training, the students are flown out to San Clemente Island, which lies off the coast of San Diego. The waters off San Clemente are a breeding ground for the great white sharks. To pass SEAL training, there are a series of long swims that must be completed. One is the night swim. Okay, could you imagine this? You're about to have to go on a really long swim. It's in the dark, and it's the breeding ground for great white sharks. So just like visualize this, right? Anybody want to do that? No. Before the swim, the instructors joyfully brief the trainees on all the species of sharks that inhabit the waters off San Clemente. Great. Now, they assure you, however, that no student has ever been eaten by a shark, at least not recently. But you're also taught, now listen to this, but you're also taught that if a shark, I don't know what a shark is, if a shark begins to circle your position, stand your ground. Do not swim away. Do not act afraid. And if the shark, hungry for a midnight snack, darts towards you, then summon up all your strength and punch him in the snout, and he will turn and swim away. There are a lot of sharks in the world, and if you hope to complete the swim, you'll have to deal with them. Now, you may be thinking, I'd really rather not punch a shark in the snout. And the idea of punching a condemning thought in the snout is a little too abstract for you. So what exactly do we do with this? How are we supposed to do that? Well, I'm glad you asked. Turn to your neighbor, each one of you, turn to your neighbor and tell them, sometimes you've got to preach to yourself. Turn to your neighbor. Go ahead and say it. Sometimes you've got to preach to yourself. All right, a few of you did it. Thank you for entertaining me. All right, now how do we do that? Here's the thing. When we are tempted to listen to a hireling's voice in our thoughts, right, just like this story here, when the negative voice are kind of circling in our head and we don't really know what to do with it, what are we supposed to do? Stop listening to the lies. Stop listening to the lies we feed ourselves. Sometimes you just have to put the brakes on your own thinking, and sometimes you have to begin speaking Jesus' truth to yourself. Right? We've probably all heard like, hey, we need to share the love of Jesus with others. Yes, we do. We also sometimes need to share the love of Jesus with ourselves, especially when we're giving in to those condemning, those negative, bad attitude thoughts, where we allow ourselves to give in to the thoughts of our hireling. Now, this leads us to an important question that we should all be asking ourselves right now. How do we know if it's the voice of Jesus or the voice of a hireling? Right? I mean, many of us in the room would probably agree, like, yes, we want to follow the voice of Jesus, but how can we tell the difference? The most important thing you can do to tell the difference between the voice of Jesus and the voice of a hireling is to become familiar with Scripture. Find a rhythm, a daily rhythm, to where you can get into the Bible, where you can read it, you can understand it, and you can apply it. This is how you're going to be able to distinguish the voice of the Good Shepherd and the voice of a hireling. Now, many in the room today are maybe new to Christianity. You may be new to following Jesus. Maybe even more of you are new to the idea of getting into the Scripture and reading it, understanding it, and applying it to your life. And so I want to share one verse with you right now that I find very helpful. I kind of treat this as a litmus test as to the question of what voice am I listening to. If we can put the fruit of the Spirit on the screen, it's Galatians 5:22 and 23. When I hear a voice and I'm asking myself, is this the voice of Jesus calling out to me, asking me to follow it, right? It can be a voice asking me to follow it by orienting my life around it. Or it can be a voice asking me to make a decision based upon it. Or it can be a voice asking me to dwell on it, my thoughts. I first ask, is it in line with these things? Is it in line with the fruit of the Spirit, which is love, joy, peace, patience, kindness, goodness, and self-control? Is it in line with those things? Now, if the voice calling out to me, if it contradicts this verse, there's a really, really good chance that is not the voice of Jesus. And if the voice is calling out to me, and it is in line with these 9 words, there's a reasonable chance this is the voice of Jesus. And we still need to get those daily rhythms where we're getting into the Bible every day and we're exploring what are the words of Jesus so that we can tell the difference. And this is a great, great place to start. So, let's not listen to the voice of a hireling. Not in the voice that guides us, not in the voice that we make our decisions based upon, and not in the voice that we listen to and we entertain with our thoughts. And that is the what. What are we to do? We're to follow the voice of Jesus. Why do we do it? Because Jesus is the good shepherd. Read with me John chapter 10, verse 9 through 14. If anyone enters by me, he will be saved and will go in and out and find pasture. The thief only comes to steal and kill and destroy. I came that they may have life and have it abundantly. I am the good shepherd. The good shepherd lays down his life for the sheep. He who is a hired hand and not a shepherd, who does not own the sheep, sees the wolf coming and leaves the sheep and flees. And the wolf snatches them and scatters them. He flees because he is a hired hand and cares nothing for the sheep. I am the good shepherd. Why do we listen to the voice of Jesus? Because the good shepherd gives us life, and he gives us life abundantly. I can testify to that. Anytime I have followed the voice of Jesus, whether it be with my life, with my decision, with my thoughts, I'm getting this. I understand what Jesus is saying when he says he gives us life, and he gives us life abundantly. I can testify that that is true. I've also come to understand that when Jesus says he gives us life, he's also preserving our lives. Preserving our lives. I think I said it right. There's not just 3 characters in this story. We've already talked about 3 of these characters in this passage, right? We've talked about the good shepherd. We've talked about the sheep. We've talked about the hired hands. What are the other 2 characters in this passage? Anybody remember? What are the other two? The thieves and the wolves. The thieves and the wolves, they're also in this story. Now, what are the wolves? The wolves are situations, they're the battles we cannot fight on our own. There are some battles we just cannot fight on our own. A sheep has no defense against a wolf. Have you ever seen what happens when a wolf comes up on a sheep? You ever seen that in the wild? Well, get ready to check it off your bucket list. I've got a picture. And don't worry, it's a before picture. It's not an after picture. Can we put the picture on the screen, please? Just a circle of life here, folks. Hey, wolf's got to eat too. All right, but here's the thing. When we follow the voice of a hireling, right? When we start going down the trail with a hireling, what does Jesus say happens when trouble comes? You know, you can just imagine the shepherd, like he throws his bow shaft or whatever that thing is, and then he runs, right? He sees a wolf and he's out of there. This is a bad situation. And if I was not super crystal clear at the beginning, in this story, we are the sheep, right? So we get this, Jesus understands the big picture. Jesus understands our needs. He understands our situation. And these are the words that Jesus is describing the situation with. The wolves do come. And if we listen to a hireling, we're going to be in trouble. We're going to be in trouble when that trouble comes. Yes, so true. But Jesus, in a spiritual sense, this represents us when we go down that path of listening to the voice of a hireling. Now, this leads to the next point. Why do we follow the voice of the Good Shepherd? Because the Good Shepherd will not leave us, right? He won't leave us in that situation, and the Good Shepherd will never leave us. The Good Shepherd will never leave us. Have you ever been tempted to take something good or something great in your life and then turn it into a god? Right? Have you ever been tempted? Maybe inadvertently, you've taken something that was good or something great in your life, and then you turned it into a god. Listen, here's the thing. There's only one voice calling out to us that will not leave us. There's only one voice calling out to us that will never disappoint us. When those good things, and even those great things, and when they call out to us and they say, listen, orient your life around me. When we follow those things, eventually those things will disappoint us, right? Eventually our career very, very likely could disappoint us. Eventually our finances could disappoint us, right? Eventually even our greatest relationships could disappoint us. And when great things disappoint us, it hurts. It stings, right? It hurts when a great thing disappoints you, right? I love my iPhone, but even it freezes up every once in a while. And it stings when a good thing disappoints you. In my relationships, so great things in life, when they disappoint you, it really does hurt. It really does hurt. But if we've inadvertently turned those good and great things into a god, and then that thing that we've created a god, when it leaves us, when it disappoints us, it will crush you. It will crush you when the thing you've made into a god leaves you. So do not give something as important as your life, as your decisions, as your thoughts to something that will one day leave you or disappoint you. Don't do it. Don't do it. And finally, why do we follow the voice of the Good Shepherd? First, he gives us life, and he gives us life abundantly. Secondly, he will not leave us. And third, the Good Shepherd lays his life down for the sheep. Jesus died for us. Jesus died for you, and he died for me. And he did that because he loves us, right? There's a lot of voices calling out to us. Only one of those voices loves us, right? Think back to my 10-year-old Sunday school class, right? That student, he could listen to any voice he wanted to, but I assure you, only the voice of the teacher was going to get him to the end. The other voices, we liked them on the side, but not during this exercise, right? We would love to have sent him right into a wall or right into the back of a chair, right? Of all the voices speaking out to us, only one truly cares us. One loves us. One of those voices will give us life abundantly. Only one of those voices will never leave us. Only one of those voices was willing to lay their life down for us. Now, if you're here this morning and you do not follow the voice of Jesus, you're still skeptical about that, it's nothing you've ever claimed to do, and perhaps you've got no plans to do it, I just want to submit one last thing to you this morning. Out of all the voices we could follow, and we are all following some voice, and out of all those voices we could be following, only one of those voices personifies, embodies the fruit of the Spirit. Can we put those 9 words on the screen? Right? Out of all the voices calling out to you and to me, only one of those voices embodies these 9 words. right? We could follow any voice, yes, but only one of those voices embodies these 9 things. And aren't these 9 characteristics that you want in an ever-increasing way in your life, right? Don't you desire for more of these things in your life, right? If somebody asked you, Kristen, could you describe your neighbor in 9 words or less? Don't you wish you could describe each of your neighbors with these 9 words and no other words, right? What about your coworkers, people in your family? Don't you wish you could describe them with these words? If somebody was asked to describe you, wouldn't you love it if these were the 9 words somebody gave to describe you? These are things that we all long for, and we all desire them. And there's only one voice that we can follow that will embody these things. There's only one voice. Now, to wrap it up here, I want to do a conclusion. If you're taking notes today and you only write down one thing and you haven't written down anything else yet, write this down. Thank you, one of you. Thank you, Cassandra. Okay, this is the thing. What are we to do? We are to listen to the voice of Jesus and the voice that ultimately guides our lives. We're to listen to the voice of Jesus in our decisions and in our thoughts. And why do we do those things? Because Jesus, He gives us life, and He gives us life abundantly. He will not leave us, and He laid His life down for us because He loved us. Of all the voices we can follow, He's the only voice that does those things. In just a second, we are going to pray. The band will come up, and we will enter into a time of communion. Today, we've been talking about the Good Shepherd. He laid His life down for us. Jesus died for you. He died for me. And today we come to remember that. And those of us who follow Jesus, we will kind of come around to the front here where we'll be serving the elements. And if you follow the voice of Jesus already, you'll take the bread and you'll remember that the Good Shepherd laid His life down for you. And then you'll dip it into the juice and remember that the blood of the Good Shepherd was poured out for you and for me because He loved us. Because He loved us. And as we enter into this time of communion, I just want to, while we prepare to take the communion, as we take the communion, and then even afterwards, I want each of us to think through, is there one area of my life where I'm still hanging on to the voice of a hireling? Right? We can say we've mastered our lives, or we've made Jesus the master of our lives, but is there one area where we're still holding on to a voice of a hireling, a voice that does not love us, it's willing to sacrifice the future just for a little short-term game? And if and when you can think of something, I'm sure all of us could probably think of some area, would you write that down? Would you just write it down on a piece of paper and put it in your pocket, or make a note on your calendar for this week on your phone, and check back in with that this week, right? We've all come encounter with the Scripture, and we learn that we need to follow the voice of Jesus. We do that because He's the Good Shepherd. But let's not get busy with life and remember what Jesus has taught us this morning. Let's note that one area where we're still holding on to the voice of a hireling, and let's check back in that this week, and let's make an honest attempt that, hey, we're not going to listen to the voice of a hireling in that area anymore. We're going to follow the voice of the Good Shepherd. All right, let's pray. Father, we are so thankful for everything You've done for us. And Jesus, we are so thankful that Your voice is calling out to us. And we can decide if we're going to follow that voice with our lives, with our decisions, and with our thoughts. And Jesus, I willingly follow that voice because You give us life, and You give us life abundantly. You will not leave us. You laid Your life down for us. Jesus, please, in this time of communion, as we leave today, search our hearts. Show us, where are we still listening to the voice of a hireling? In what area, God, will it be in a decision that we've made or decisions that we repeatedly make? Perhaps we have a big decision.